A couple of months ago, John Gallagher and Diego Rubio visited my daughter's school. Unfortunately, my daughter was out that day, so she missed this joyous occasion of a lot of her classmates gawking over these Austin FC players. Players, of course, that I've interviewed a bunch. What happened, though, a couple days ago is I was at Mueller HEB, a place that I frequently am, and saw a sign, John Gallagher and Diego Rubio making an appearance on Thursday late afternoon. And hey, what a great opportunity for Emmy to finally meet these players that she missed out on. Not only did she meet them, she inadvertently became the youngest member of the Austin FC press corps by doing an impromptu interview on the spot. And we're going to share that with you right now because there's some valuable stuff that came out of this.
The fourth question, do you like bacon?
I do like bacon, but I try not to eat it as much as I'd like to.
I like it. I like it a lot. Okay, are you guys playing in the All-Star Cup, like in PLV?
No, we are not.
I wish.
He was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
How's the medal? How that was?
How was that?
Oh, it was a very cool experience. I got to play against Arsenal. I think your dad was even there. You traveled, didn't you?
Yep.
Yeah. It was a great experience.
Of course you did.
One last question you want to?
Mark.
All right. That's a pretty good interview.
So, Moisés, I want to visit this point of bacon. Of course, there'll be two real questions that she asked, but I wanted to point something out with bacon. So, John Gallagher talked about avoiding bacon, and obviously he's doing multiple full 90s, can understand the dietary concerns there. Diego Rubio, though, on the other hand, just said that he likes bacon a lot. So I assume that him being in the tail end of his career and having worked really hard for years and years, that he is indulging a little bit. So my theory is that Galley is avoiding bacon and Rubio is eating bacon. Through about 1,600 playing minutes so far, Gallagher has 1 goal and 0 assist. Rubio has 1 goal and 1 assist with about 209 minutes. So if we're looking at bacon and an indicator of how well you're playing, I think there's a case to be made for bacon here.
Yeah, XB is an underappreciated stat, expected bacon performance.
Emergency podcast. Better did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, oh yeah, shut up, oh yeah, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, a hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the Austin FC podcast, where we talk about all the Austin FC emergencies, including LAFC game tonight. It has been raining a lot, all the devastation and loss, all of that. So let's go ahead, Moisés, as we look into this game. We always seem to have this question of, is this a good time to catch them? And one thing that you might notice on the injury report is Austin FC doesn't have anybody on the injury report, which is great. But also, Hugo Lloris is going to be out. One Frenchman is already gone. Of course, Olivier Giroud is no longer a member of LAFC, sadly, for those who like handsome and those who are hoping to glimpse some handsome at tonight's game. But it looks like Thomas Hasal, former Whitecaps goalkeeper, now a member of LAFC, is going to likely be subbing in for a injured Lloris. And just wondering your thoughts about... We always seem to play this game of, is it a good time to catch them? But indeed, is it?
Let me try to flip it a bit, because I think that phrasing it that way, we've determined is cursed. We said this about Canada in the Gold Cup. We said this about Inter in the Club World Cup. We're
getting to those later.
Various things. Yeah, we'll touch on those later. There's a teaser for you. We said it about Vancouver earlier in the year. We said it about Seattle on the other side of their elimination from the Club World Cup. I think that playing at that level is something that we definitely saw sharpen the edges of the swords for the opposition when it came to Seattle. So looking at it from a totally different dynamic, just looking at who's out, who's available, I think them being without Hugo Lloris and having a not first choice goalkeeper is a good thing for Austin, to have that be the opposing goalkeeper on their home ground, with a raucous 4th of July weekend crowd rocking Q2.
Be tailgate fueled, apparently.
Yeah.
There is a tailgate from Fortis over at the D lot, I believe.
Yeah. Cross SG tailgate brews and hot dogs, and the grill will be going.
Free snarf
Good,
sandwiches, I hear.
good times will be had by all. I feel like that is a good thing in Austin's favor, is a well-stocked, very energetic fan base that is ready to rock and ready to see another home game. The injury report, lack of availabilities are one thing, but there is just something about not having your first choice goalkeeper, the most stable part of any lineup in MLS or any other top flight league. That's something that it would be shocking to have a reserve goalkeeper just drop in and be in perfect form. Stephen Cleveland is a good goalkeeper, no doubt. But we saw what happened early in Open Cup, where he wasn't in as good of form as he was in Leagues Cup last year, when he was arguably a big part of that win. Yeah, I think that that's really going to bite LAFC harder than any curse-related things that we could try to throw at them.
And of course, LAFC is coming off a bad Club World Cup, you could say, similar to Seattle, right? I mean, again, put up some good fights in some of those games, but was out after 3 unsatisfactory, ultimately, judging from the scoreboard, Club World Cup appearances in the group stage. So again, but Seattle, we saw that as being more of maybe a motivational thing, right? So they came in and definitely were on their game against Austin, which we'll get to a little bit later here with some interesting BHI comments from this week. We have to mention, we'll get into some details on this a little bit later, but last night over at Palmer Field, Austin FC 2 beat LAFC 2 4-1. And that, if you harken back to that 4-1 game of a couple of years ago, maybe that's a good omen.
There has been some synchronicity between first team and second team results over the course of this season. And as I told Austin FC2 head coach Brett Utley last night, this is definitely one that the first team would love to sync up with the second team on, where there were enough Austin FC first team contract players who were on the field last night. Jimmy Farcarlin, CJ Fodre, Micah Burton, Riley Thomas. There was a fair chunk of a first team roster out there playing against LAFC's teenagers. Thinking about the roster of it all and everything, the other thing to keep in mind is that Giroud going out, Giroud was always going to play for as long as he was at LAFC. LAFC is already knowing that they're going to go into a next season with a new coach. And on the sporting side of things, they are already in the process of making decisions. And there are guys who might be trying to ball out extra hard to make sure that they win their minutes, that they keep their spot, that they earn their place. And sometimes that is not actually the best way to mentally go into a game, and you end up making mistakes because you're trying to be Billy Badass and just get out there and score goal after goal after goal, and you end up giving it away and letting things happen in transition and that sort of thing. LAFC is a team in transition. It's not just that they came off of those bruising Club World Cup games. It's that there is an aura of uncertainty about things. And who knows if there is any validity to the rumors that were going around about Club America being interested in Denny Bouanga. Maybe that's a thing. When Tom Bogert says there is nothing to this for now, that for now makes me furrow my brow a little bit. He didn't say there's nothing in it. There's nothing in it for now, as we are in transfer rumor land and wading into the thick of it. Somebody like Bogert wants to break stuff and doesn't like getting scooped on stuff. And as I saw him looking annoyed at his phone while on Morning Footy as he got scooped on something by a certain Italian, who knows what kinds of crazy stuff is going on. Literally last night, the Whitecaps bought somebody out, and a lot of stuff is going on.
And then they went on to lose to the Galaxy 3-0, which was bizarre.
Yeah. A lot of crazy stuff is going on, and that could extend to LAFC having a more bizarrely unproductive trip to Q2 Stadium than people might expect.
Yeah, just one note here. Moderate impact this season. So 3 goals, 1 assist, 11 game appearances, and 6 starts of those. 11 shots on target, 3 goals out of those. So he'd been playing decently. I don't think he is ever the player that they expected him to be, maybe, when he came on. And again, that is a wild card. You have a player that is that advanced in his career. And then also you and I, as long-suffering Arsenal fans, we saw a lot of matches where Giroud would be in front of goal and would have an opportunity and would not convert on that opportunity. So, I mean,
so
definitely.
reminding me.
All around good player. Excellent goalkeeper, by the way, as we learned.
Excellent goalkeeper. Like,
didn't know that he had that in his
knew?
pocket. There was another game this week too. So we have obviously the LAFC game, which is important, I think, to the overall just course of the season, because you have those 2 wins and you have this loss. And so this is definitely a bounce back opportunity game. And things do get, with this Open Cup game on Tuesday, a little congested. We're going to have 4 games in the space of 12 days. And then after that, there are going to be some yawn gaps because there is the All-Star match and then there is the start of Leagues Cup. Things are going to get fairly light for the next few weeks as the thick of summer happens. Not a bad thing, really. Tuesday, of course, Austin travels to San Jose for the rights to get into the Final Four of the Open Cup, which is pretty exciting to say. We learned from Nico Estevez in Thursday's media availability that they are going to spend the night on Tuesday night to maximize their training potential for the limited days of training that they're going to have. We do have one concerning bit of news out of the San Jose camp, though. I don't know if you heard about this.
I know for a fact that they have the power of Waka Waka on their side. Shakira is on their side.
She posed a few days ago at some press event thing, inexplicably, I am not sure why, with Christian Espinoza being handed a Shakira jersey. The social media account declared black and blue officially in its Waka Waka era. We do not know if that's going to propel them. We do not know if indeed hips are not going to lie, and that's going to propel Bruce Arena's team to victory. So that is something that Austin will have to overcome. But both teams, again, they're going to be heavily rotated, possibly, potentially from Saturday matches, just depending on how much they're going to leave out there on the field and who's going to be with reserves in the tank. And it seems like we're not going to have necessarily rotation in this game to prepare for Tuesday. If I were Nico Estevez, I would prioritize Tuesday. I think this is a great opportunity to advance in the Open Cup and to come closer to Austin FC's first non-Copa Tejas trophy. Austin does already have a win over LAFC. We got to point out from earlier this year, making it 2 against LAFC would be nice and rewarding. And of course, 3 points towards advancing in a very congested West.
The way that he was talking on Thursday morning, I can't disagree with his stance on putting his best 11 out in front of LAFC and then looking at what happens over the course of that match and how people are looking, what kind of condition people are in. You look at last night's Austin FC 2 match where CJ Fodry was getting minutes, Jimmy Farcarlin was getting minutes, Micah Burton was getting minutes, Riley Thomas was getting minutes. They definitely had these guys playing because not just they are among the best guys that they have available to play for that team, but who's to say that some of those guys may not get minutes in that Open Cup match, even though it's a shorter roster, in next Saturday's game against the Revs. I think it's smart that we are seeing the promise of the potential actually happening, where those second team guys or guys who are going to get more second team minutes than first team minutes, who have first team contracts, we are seeing them actually being in reserve and ready to join the fight at a moment's notice when needed and when called up. That's something that having that instead of them being the constantly broken glass in case of emergency because the roster is literally short is something that it's a relief to be on the other side of those days that we've seen over the last couple of years.
Right. And if you look at the standings, so LAFC and Austin are tied on points with 26, but LAFC has 3 games in hand on Austin and basically everybody else. San Jose, by the way, is on 27 points. They're in 6th in the conference right now. Of course, on tiebreakers, LAFC 7th, Austin 9th. LAFC coming into this with a 7-5-5 record, Austin with a 7-8-5 record. So again, just from the pure mathematics standpoint of things, and in terms of Austin trying to think about that end of season positioning, this is an important game. This is a chance to get 3 points to the good, and it's also a chance to get LAFC in those kind of makeup games to get losses versus results, and definitely important in terms of just the shuffling that's going to be happening throughout this latter half of the season. Again, this is what we expected once we saw what this team was after those top 4 projections faded away. We knew that this was going to be a dogfight to get into those last few playoff spots. So in that perspective alone, I think this game's important.
All 4 of the games that they've got ahead of them in advance of the All-Star break, the, for them, Leagues Cup break, they are all important for different reasons. It would be great for all 4 of them to be wins. I'm not putting a likelihood on that. but I think it's possible to make all 4 of them wins. And the transformative nature of having 3 league games that are outright wins, if not draws. LAFC, it's keeping, as you said, a team that's got a few games in at bay with 1 direct loss, grabbing points from the other conference against New England, also incredibly important so that they can keep climbing the ladder. And if they can't win in Carson, that's a really depressing way to go into the All-Star break, is just kind of the way that feels. If they can do this as a 4-game streak, staying in Open Cup, picking up 9 points in July, that does a lot. Slightly less than 9 points, also good. Not going to knock, let's say, 5 points out of the month of July. But boy, 9 points out of July sure would be a lot nicer.
Right. But again, they are going to have to score goals, something that they've had trouble doing. And they're going to have to defend too, because it's going to be rough. Just thinking about Tuesday's match against San Jose, to jump to that a little bit as well. You've got Chicho Arango, you've got Joseph Martinez, obviously Hernan Lopez. It looks like he's on the way out. Designated player who I thought was going to be doing a little bit more with that team. They still have Christian Espinoza, of course, which I think he's a really underrated chance creator in this league. Been an all-star before, and definitely all-star potential, even though, again, we know about this year's all-star team. There's a lot of really good candidates. Goals don't necessarily get you an all-star spot, as we dwelled on last week a little bit. You get on the other side of that Open Cup game, and hopefully there's not disappointment there with New England, and I think with the Galaxy, 2 definitely winnable games, although Galaxy showed that they can win at home now. They just did that, and Joseph Paintsel got a brace, so maybe he's a little bit back. Our friend Alex Ruiz wrote a thing for his Galactic Tribune a few days ago about Joseph Paintsel and wondering about his form, and somehow, I don't know, maybe Joseph Paintsel read that and got a brace. Good on Alex for boosting a team that he covers that desperately needs boosting.
I'll put it this way. Austin beats LA Galaxy. It means Austin is better than Vancouver. That's what we know by the transit
properties.
Yeah. I don't think that, as poor a form as Galaxy has been in this season, that going to Carson is going to necessarily be easy for this team, because there is that boiling bad blood where you had the Galaxy's coach almost having to be dragged off the field, giving the refs an earful, and also shouting at Austin players. I get it. Things were bad for them at that point of the season, and they only got worse. But there is a certain amount of descontrol that comes from the Galaxy side of that equation that is going to make that one, I think, spicier and more interesting than people may be anticipating. Knowing that going into enemy territory in any visiting stadium is something. This season in particular, this particular vibe and these contrasting rosters of players, there is some bad blood there that I think could get nasty. We'll see if the fans are actually in the stands.
Yeah, I would be really curious to see the ref assignment for that one, to see if it is somebody who can control those potential tensions.
Pray for Tori Penso. Pray for Tori Penso.
Or Drew Fisher.
Drew
Fisher. Somebody who has experience, who can lock that down. Yeah, not what we had last time. What we had last time was not optimal. That did not work out all that well.
At all.
Oh my goodness. All right. I want to get to Brendan Hines-Ike's comments from Thursday, because I thought this was interesting. Obviously, Austin had a rough time with Seattle, and I really liked BHI's reflection on this, because again, acknowledge that they did have some really good defensive games earlier. We've seen this team be effective defensively. That indeed, I think, has kept them in the running, given the goal scoring, which is a whole other matter. I'm going to be kind of curious next week. We can probably pick this apart a little bit more. I expect we're going to see some Azuni minutes. One of the possible topics of discussion when we do this next Friday or Saturday, depending on when we get to record, is where Azuni has that trip back to Spain really helped him. But BHI talked about both goals happening being a chain effect, talking about starting with individual errors. We've seen that. It's good that he recognizes that. And then I want to get to this part, because I think this is really interesting. For us, especially as a backline, we have to remember that first and foremost, that the objective when you're broken down from a midfield is then to regain your back four as quickly as possible, which, even looking for the first goal, we do regain for the fours of the line, and then we quickly lose it right as the ball comes in. And I think just those little principles, which we've harped on a lot throughout the year, we've done quite well with, can be, again, a product of being on break, of not having the rhythm of doing that on a regular basis at the same time. I think that's been our biggest strength this year that we've talked about. I remember talking about with you at the beginning of the preseason that when we've broken down in transition, that we get our guys behind the ball and regain numbers so we don't get countered on. Something we've talked about and something we've been good at for the most part of the year. And to be honest, that is something that did get emphasized by Estevez. We did notice that, but obviously, as we saw with that first goal in particular against the Sounders. We saw Biru being caught out, not necessarily knowing where to be, even if you count that as, oh, maybe he just had a momentary lapse that he then was moving over to Ferreira. At that point, it was too late. It's like when you are in that kind of situation, you have to know who your guys are. You have to stick with those players. You have to, especially somebody like Ferreira, who has burned Austin so many times before. It's like how you don't have eyes on him that whole game.
It's a different color shirt that he's wearing these days, but that was something that was, if I had to boil it down to one particular element of that game that was most difficult to watch, it was the way that he was just being allowed to perform radically better than he has most of the season against most of their other opponents. They just let this guy who has had their number have their number. Absolutely baffling. And the loss against Seattle being what it is what it is. I think that for them to get shaken back into reality with that, I would rather it have happened then against LAFC, against the Revs, in an Open Cup game against San Jose, in an away game in Carson. I would so much rather it have happened against the Sounders than any of the various ways that things could fall apart in these next 4 games to get them back on their game.
San Diego FC now leading the West. That Galaxy win against Vancouver really helped them. So we could have an expansion team reminiscent of St. Louis a couple of years ago. Weird, but here we are.
Speaking of curses, Phil.
Right. Well, let's get into, speaking of curses, let's get into our collective sadness. Our Gold Cup Club World Cup report. Of course, the U.S. had a thrilling PK victory over Costa Rica, got them into the Gold Cup final, which is going to be taking place, of course, tomorrow night, 6 p.m. in Houston. We're going to be making that trip, right?
You will be making that trip alone.
I'm all right.
Not going to be able to make it, but I wish you well. A cup final, as I've said to you in this context and various other contexts. Look, going to MLS Next Pro Cup last year, even though I wasn't directly following either of the teams that were in it. What a great experience at a terrible stadium watching a horrible team win.
The press box is on the 8th floor to give you a sense of NRG Stadium.
I wish you well out in our NRG, and I hope you survive the experience.
The U.S.-Mexico final is not the sadness that we were talking about. That is a matchup that we were accustomed to. That is a typical Gold Cup final. We've come to this with all the madness, and the madness, of course, included Canada got bumped by Guatemala. So that was,
which it was a history-making thing for Guatemala. Like, they had something to celebrate, and they played it. They earned it. Absolutely, incredibly well-deserved for them. There are those upsets that happen. And in this case, it's not that Canada was bad or terrible or something like that. They just were not the better team that night.
Yeah, they were not great. They had a red card right before halftime, which was very problematic. Actually, a second yellow on Schappelberg, but still, he should have known better. It was a very, very careless, reckless second yellow. Guatemala did a lot to kind of CONCACAF that game up, did a lot of frustrating things to Canada. Canada, of course, is without a few of their good players, but no excuse. Jonathan David was on the field. He's about to go to Juventus, which is going to make that team a lot more fun. You've got now David and, of course, McKennie and Weah on that team. So if you like CONCACAF and you're looking for a Serie A team, that might be your team.
That's what you want out of a Serie A team, but
exactly.
You could actually have a good time.
I was really looking forward to a Canada-U.S. semifinal because I just wanted to see where those teams were comparing at this point. The big story of the Gold Cup U.S.-wise has been that Diego Luna is amazing and he is fun to watch and he's really good at soccer and is definitely somebody who should be sharpening into this team right now. He is vital to what they're doing. They are so much better and so much more fun for having him there. And I thought Canada was the more fun and more loose team. Guatemala figured out ways to stymie them. Guatemala was a great story, good for them. Would have been great to see them actually make it all the way to the final, but unfortunately not the case. So we get the U.S.-Mexico final that we deserve. It's what we expected at the start.
You mentioned Diego Luna. Something that CBS's Ali Charles Martin said the other day online. She's been saying it actually, that there's just something about his story that he feels like the natural fit for captain going into the World Cup. And
for sure.
I have no criticism of that whatsoever. In fact, fully agree. This is a player who his story is solid. The way that you've gotten to see him work on himself and work on being a better communicator and better teammate, somebody who is not just one among 11, but a standout and who helps rally his teammates. That's what the U.S. needs. That's the kind of energy that I would like to see, is not the stuff that in various waves has made me uninterested in the U.S. men's national team, which is this kind of principito thing of there is this anointed kind of thing. There's nothing about Diego Luna that feels anointed. Everything about Diego Luna feels earned.
Right. Yeah, for sure. One-time El Paso Locomotive player, which
Yeah.
is wild to say. And now look at him. So
I would love to see people wearing Diego Luna Locomotive jerseys out during the World Cup next year.
me
That'd
too.
be crazy.
Absolutely. Speaking of leagues that are not MLS, do we want to hit on Next Pro real quick and what happened Friday night over at Palmer Field? Because a very interesting game, some new faces and some familiar faces contributing to that match.
The departure of Nico van Rijn, which is a big surprise to a lot of people. Look, he just wanted to go back to Spain, and as much as we're going to get official word as to what really went down there, that's what he wanted to do. We'll see if you're playing in La Liga or in third division, or who knows what sunnier future he saw for himself there. But what that did is immediately open up a starting spot in the back line, which was filled by Jules Berry, who joined Austin FC2 a number of weeks back and has not played competitive minutes to the extent of many of his other teammates. So there wasn't a lot of data to go off of other than him subbing on. And he was perfectly fine. Like, he was real solid. Like, he was real good. It was in no way that there was a big wide open hole in the back line all of a sudden. This is purely speculative on my part, but if this French defender came in and he's working his way in, and Van Rijn gets word that he's not going to get the start, and that this guy who just joined the team is going to get the start in coming weeks, maybe that is something that you deal with a young ego, and that young ego goes, no, that is my spot, and I am better than that, and thanks, I'm going to go back to Spain. I could see that totally logically being the way that something might have played out. I've got no inside word or dirt or anything like that. But just watching the way that Jules played last night, it is not outside the realm of possibility that seeing that kind of a threat to one's assumed entitled position could have contributed to what that decision was. But we'll never know unless he decides to get loose on a podcast sometime. Another random thing that happened, Tony Gomez had to go out because it looked like he took a knock. I think they were about to bring in Diego Abarca as their final sub of the night. But when Tony Gomez got rocked a bit, we had a debut last night. Austin FC Academy player Chuy Moreno, who was wearing the number 35 previously worn by Mason Miller, another Academy guy. And he did super solid. Austin's got teens of their own now, you see, that are a sudden and unexpected threat. What I liked most about the game is that it signaled everything that I know that the first team wants to be doing, the first team is capable of doing, that everyone expects the first team to be doing by now, which is find an early goal, keep that momentum up, get another goal before the end of the first half, keep the pressure on, maybe make a dumb mistake that leads to a PK and results in an answering goal from the other side, fine. But then score 2 more goals, so that answering goal means absolutely nothing. And have 4 of your 5 subs happen before the 70th minute of the game, which to me is not necessarily just a sign of things are going pretty well if you're able to cycle in other guys, but also it means that things are happening and you're not just hoping that things are going to eventually happen.
And one of those players you sub on is Irvin Torres, and he can make an immediate impact. That's a good thing.
Yeah, precisely. Irvin Torres, a player that Nico Estevez has talked about in not just the last week in official media availability, but has talked about in other parts of the season. The head of the academy has talked about very favorably and has been very eager to see him earn those first team minutes, which he got some of right at the tail end of last season. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening on the Next Pro side of things that I think to ignore it is missing an important part of the overall building story. What's happening with Austin FC now that they have gotten younger, now that they are having more of their homegrown talent aging up from the academy ranks into playing those third division minutes. I keep saying it, it's the best $12 ticket you will buy
Mhm.
for a soccer game at the professional level. You will see these guys making their way up to the first team because that's very much the way that they're designing this pipeline to work. They are not puppy milling this thing the way that FC Dallas has been very, very well known for doing.
Right, right. We had a conversation in between talking to Nico and talking to Sabovic after the last game about the academy and the state of the academy. And certain media personality was talking about how disappointing the academy was overall, but had to remind him that it's only been 5 years. You've got like FC Dallas and these other academies that have a much greater head start on Austin than that.
Yeah.
It has been a little tumultuous. This is the second era of sporting directors, and there were a lot of, again, with Next Pro coming on board, that's new to everybody, but certainly changes from the previous era in terms of how you approach that versus how you approach that now, and thinking about the pipeline and all that. And we are beginning to see with Irvin Torres, with Micah Burton's continued development. Of course, he came over from the Minnesota Academy very early in Austin's time with an academy when Minnesota was going through some kind of weird existential crisis and wasn't going to have an academy for a while. So we are beginning, I think, to see some of this happening, and we'll see and be able to better gauge this a few years ago. But I think people still need to be a little patient with this just because it is relatively new. And again, it's something that got built entirely from the ground up.
And we also had another player signed to the second team this week, Marcel Ruzel, who holds dual U.S. and Polish citizenship, played for FCC2 while in their academy, then moved to Torino, made 65 appearances for the U19 and U20 teams there between 22 and 24. And then he played in Poland during last season. He's a 21-year-old. He's a midfielder. Energetic midfield is something that Austin needs to keep up, especially if, who knows, some of the guys that are on the senior roster might be moving in the summer window, might be looking for a move in the winter window to come after that. There's a lot going on, and I think that saying that the Austin FC Academy is a disaster because of a U.S. men's national team gossip and rumor account that posts about gossip and rumors that are spread, one presumes, by unhappy parents and academies. That's a different thing than actually paying attention to the development pipeline and the way that these players are coming up. Either you can just take what comes out of somebody's parent's mouth or something that just got filtered around through known rumor mill kind of things, or you look at the way that the development is actually happening on the field in actual competitive play.
Yeah, for sure.
I did want to dip back to Club World Cup for a second.
Oh, yeah.
Because the curse of expectations, I didn't expect Inter Milan to have the greatest tournament ever. I didn't expect them to go out the way that they did necessarily. But I'm kind of glad that they did, because it seems like it was part of a further catalyst of rocking roster changes that are going to happen, because there are locker room conflicts and that kind of thing. It's been really interesting watching this tournament as it heads toward the semifinals. The curse thing that I think I have to answer, you're hoping Canada made it all the way to the finals of Gold Cup. For me, it was holding out hope for an all Brazil semifinal. I blame myself fully for the fact that it's not Fluminense and Palmeiras, and it's just Fluminense against Chelsea in the semifinal. And then on the other side, we have an all Europe bracket. It is going to be less interesting to me if it's an all Europe final. I really desperately want Fluminense to utterly wreck Chelsea. So
in the Thiago Silva Cup.
So that there is something. So that there's something making the Club World Cup final not Champions League America edition.
Yeah.
That's where my head's at on Club World Cup stuff. It's not that the teams are not interesting on the other side of the bracket. They play interesting soccer, and I'm sure the games will be good, but I see them play all the time, man.
Right.
You know?
I know. Yeah.
I want more things like Auckland City scoring against Boca Juniors. Stuff that is quote unquote not supposed to happen. I want more of that.
Right. We all want that.
It's been an unfortunate week for sad news. This is, I guess, where we bring up the incredibly shocking passing of Diogo Jota, most recently with Liverpool, who, you don't have to be a Liverpool supporter or somebody who follows Liverpool specifically to be a human being about the categorical level of tragedy that this is.
Yeah.
A guy who got married 10 days before his death, who was lost in a car accident alongside his brother.
Right. Leaves behind 3 small children who he had with this person that he just married.
A great deal of credit as word has gotten around that Liverpool plans to honor the remainder of his contract and also ensure the university education of his children. Just a really shocking isn't even the word for it. The thing that really got me was seeing videos as Al Hilal was kicking off against Fluminense, that as his image was put up on the screen, that 2 of his former teammates, Neves and Cancelo, seeing his image on the big screen in the stadium, just broke down crying. And I don't in any way fault their coach for starting them in a game that was definitely going to be emotional for them. I question FIFA timing that tribute for just as these players are about to have to start to play a game. To me, that's something that I squarely lay the blame on the organizing organization. But it's been the heartening thing for me has been seeing the very human reaction from people across the football world in honor of him, taking this as a moment of reflection and consideration for there being things that are bigger than what happens on the field, much bigger. Yeah, it's a hell of a thing. That was a sobering thing for me that made me take a step back from, well, I'm kind of glad that I had detached from this competition a little bit already, because that's a hell of a choice, Gianni Infantino.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, we have next on our list the All-Star jersey, which
Phil,
I do want to talk about. I got a fabric update from you a couple days ago via text, which was nice to see. It's always nice in the middle of a workday to suddenly see interesting textures that I did not think existed necessarily from just initial photos of that All-Star jersey. You want to explain a little bit what I'm going on about here?
I've made joking references to, it's the Bounty Quicker Picker Upper kit, because it looks like a textured paper towel. But as much as I was joking about that, that's actually a pretty good way to communicate the way that the embossing of the firework patterns on the jersey look. It looks a lot better in person, which is something that has been said about so many jerseys. It is still a predominantly all white jersey with shoulder stripes on it. But in addition to the Austin specific jock tag, which features an Austin native prickly pear cactus, an actual cactus that is found in Central Texas.
Yeah.
In
Not
Austin
in love with the cactus, but I'm glad that it's at least this cactus and not.
It's the right cactus, at least, even though we're not overrun with cacti. You got a bat on the back of the neck. And there was this kind of, will there or won't there be a sponsor? And I just could not, as I've said on the show previously, I could not rationalize MLS not selling the front of the shirt sponsorship for a jersey that Leo Messi is going to wear.
Right.
Guess what? I was right. Because according to employees at the VerDos store, Old Spice has come in to be the front of shirt sponsor. And as soon as the league gets them the design file for what will be heat pressed onto those jerseys, they will be putting that Old Spice logo onto all of those jerseys. So if you want one that is blank, get it now. That is the word that I've gotten. They do.
If you don't
fit
want to
slim.
rep Old Spice.
Yeah, if you don't want to rep Old Spice, if you're more of a degree antiperspirant, if you're bigger on Gold Bond, that is the sponsor. It's going to be in black print. And as I understand it, the player numbers and names are going to be in black print on the back, matching the bat, matching the jock tag. And okay, I can actually break some news, Phil. I didn't even tell you this. So we're telling the audience for the first time.
Okay, what do we got?
We know for certain that Lionel Messi will be wearing the number 10.
Oh, what a surprise.
Yep. And that is the only player's number that the people at the VerDos store know. So if you want another player, you'll have to wait until they have been officially told which player has which number, because they're not allowed to put a player's name and the wrong number on it.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So that it's all being done very tightly. Oh, and the Austin color specific All-Star merch is already for sale. There's a scarf, there's some patches, some stick-on jock tags. Those will be available for sale leading up to All-Star weekend, leading into All-Star half week. And then they will be pulled in favor of the league-wide MLS All-Star merch. And then on the other side of All-Star, if there are remaining quantities of those scarves, of those patches and jock tags, they will be back at the VerDos store. So that is the MLS All-Star VerDos store report that I got from
shopping.
Yes.
Time your shopping accordingly. And then speaking of that All-Star half week, go ahead and save the date for Monday, July 21st. We'll have some more information next week. We're doing some planning right now, but something potentially very, very exciting coming down the pike for you all to see us in person.
Yeah, there's a FanFest stuff happening Saturday and Sunday nights. And of course, the Skills Challenge is Tuesday night, and the game itself is Wednesday night. But in the middle of all those festivities, if you need some kind of, say, an emergency happy hour of sorts, we might have something for you.
We might, yeah. But more details on that next week as we continue forward. All right, so that brings us to the end. That is a very, very packed show that we have just done. Covered a lot of ground, of course, with 4 games in 12 days. Who can blame us? So next week, obviously, as we look on the other side of what happened tonight with LAFC and looking at the Open Cup, hopefully looking forward to a semifinal or assessing what has been a decent run gone bad in San Jose. I'm hoping it's the former, clearly, because more Open Cup games would be fun to cover. Anything else you got before we
No, that's it. Let's hope for that Open Cup win so that we have something definitely fun to talk about.
Right. And then, of course, as usual, look to your inboxes right after the game tonight to get assessments from me on how things went that you've seen with your own eyes. And then, of course, on Sunday morning before I head off to Houston, you'll be getting quotes from the match in your inbox. Not quotes from a 7-year-old journalist, but we're working on that. She's taking her first step towards being part of that press crew. So maybe someday we'll see her in the locker room asking other players about bacon.
This is the best thing I've heard in the history of the 7 years I've been on this whole world.